For 7 years, I have been working at my current company, and for the last 5 years, I've been part of the same team. Our team consists of 15 members, and over time, we have developed strong relationships with each other. One of my colleagues, Bob, who is 33 years old and joined the team around the same time I did during the pandemic, recently got engaged. He proudly announced his engagement to the entire team during a Zoom meeting, which marked a significant moment for him and for us as teammates. As the months passed, the excitement for Bob's upcoming wedding grew. He informed us that the ceremony was scheduled to take place in September at a stunning winery, a venue that many would certainly consider beautiful and ideal for such an important occasion. However, as the invitations began to arrive for the other team members, I noticed that mine was nowhere to be found. I waited for a few weeks in hopes that it was simply delayed or lost in the mail, but when nothing came, I decided to approach Bob directly. When I asked him if my invitation had been sent, he gave me a serious look and explained that I was not invited due to a spacing issue. He expressed regret that he could not include me and reassured me that this was not personal. Bob mentioned that although I would not be present at the wedding, I would still receive wedding favors and a piece of cake. He also requested that I keep this information to myself and not make it a big deal. I was taken aback and didn't know how to respond, so I simply said, "Okay," and walked away, feeling a mixture of emotions. Being excluded from the wedding was hard for me to accept, especially since it felt even worse knowing that all my teammates would be celebrating without me. I genuinely enjoy weddings. They're usually filled with joy, laughter, and fun experiences. I chose to keep my feelings bottled up inside, but I could not shake off the disappointment. The day of the wedding arrived 3 weeks ago, and from what I heard, everything went wonderfully. My colleagues shared stories of the beautiful ceremony and the delicious food, and many mentioned how amazing the party was. Everyone even received a dozen fresh apple cider donuts to take home, which sounded delightful. Yet, I never received any cake or wedding favors, despite Bob's earlier promise. When I returned to work the following Monday, I was met with questions about my absence. Sherry, another team member, mentioned that everyone was curious about where I had been. To my surprise, Bob had told them that I was sick and unable to attend. Confused and frustrated, I set the record straight and confirmed that I had not been invited at all. It was a strange moment, and Sherry seemed shocked to learn this. News of my exclusion quickly spread among the team. Later that day, Bob returned from his honeymoon. He approached me in the break room, visibly upset that I had shared the truth with Sherry. He insisted that it was not a significant issue that I missed the wedding. I confronted him, asking how he would feel if he were left out of such an important occasion that everyone else was attending. Our conversation escalated into a back-and-forth exchange before he eventually walked away. Feeling upset, I caught the attention of my project manager, who came over to check on me after hearing about my situation. I didn't intend for this matter to cause such a stir, so I replied that I was okay. However, more team members came up to share their thoughts, expressing that it was wrong for Bob to exclude me from the wedding. I understood that it was Bob's wedding, and he had the right to decide who to invite. However, it was completely valid for me to feel hurt over not being included. Reflecting on the situation, I noticed that everyone else on the team received +1s, with 12 out of the 15 team members being older and already in relationships, except for Bob and myself. Interestingly, there was a 26-year-old woman who attended the wedding solo, and I began to wonder if Bob's wife had a problem with me. Bob and I briefly met at a work Christmas party 3 years ago, where we spent a pleasant 15 minutes chatting about video games. I couldn't comprehend why his wife would not want me there, as we hadn't talked much since then. I thought she was merely interested in my gaming levels, considering she added me online for that reason. I realized that I shared similar characteristics with my colleagues, including appearance, which made me question if there was something about me that led to my exclusion. In the end, my feelings of resentment and confusion lingered, leaving me to wonder if I was in the wrong for expressing my feelings about not being invited to Bob's wedding. When it comes to attractiveness, I wouldn't describe myself as classically handsome. I'm not exactly a modern-day Greek god like Jimmy G, but I do stand tall at 6 feet 4 inches and spend a good amount of time lifting weights. This has given me a lean physique, which seems to serve me well in the dating scene. While it might sound a bit self-centered to say, I am straight and have had my fair share of successes when it comes to dating. As for my colleague Bob, he is by no means unattractive either. Although he is shorter than I am, he still has a good height and is known for his excellent conversational skills. I genuinely can't see any reason why he would feel threatened by me. The reason I prefer to keep this situation low-key is due to our work environment. We work from home 3 days a week, which means I don't have to interact with him if I choose not to. Up until now, I have never had any issues or conflicts with Bob, aside from this particular incident, but I will definitely be mindful of how he handles perceptions in the workplace. If I notice anything that seems out of line, I will report it to our project manager. In an update, I recently posed a question about whether I was wrong for expressing to others that I had not been invited to a wedding. I appreciate all the feedback regarding the situation, especially concerning the invites. The story has taken a turn I didn't expect. Bob approached me at work and suggested we have a conversation over a few beers with his wife, Pam, after work to clear the air. I agreed to meet up with them. Later that evening, I met Bob and Pam at a local bar. To my surprise, they both apologized for not including me in their wedding festivities and acknowledged how it may have felt to be left out. Bob specifically expressed regret for lying about the reason and his frustrations regarding the situation. It turned out that their decision not to invite me stemmed from a past experience they had at a wedding in 2019. According to them, that event was disrupted by rowdy single men aggressively hitting on women, creating a tense atmosphere that escalated into a physical confrontation involving arrests. They shared some Facebook videos from that wedding that showcased the chaos, and I was taken aback at how wild it looked. Pam elaborated on how this experience traumatized her, prompting her to make a firm decision to exclude single men from their wedding. As a result, their guest list was composed primarily of family members and couples, which Pam claimed contributed to a more enjoyable environment since women didn't have to deal with unwanted attention. When I asked whether they didn't trust me to behave appropriately, Pam clarified that Bob had vouched for me, but she was committed to her policy of not inviting single men for the sake of ensuring a smooth event. Interestingly, Pam mentioned she has a sister around my age who she believed would be a good match for me, yet she was hesitant to let us meet due to her sister's reputation for being a bit wild. While I found that comment a tad offensive, Pam insisted it was for my own benefit, saying her sister could be trouble. Bob admitted he should have managed the situation better from the start, and though he wanted to be transparent, he believed it wouldn't have influenced their decision much. He thought I might not want to attend a wedding as a single man anyway. I candidly expressed my feelings about being perceived as someone who might act inappropriately at their wedding. Pam reassured me that she considered me a nice, smart, and funny guy, but her focus was on having a flawless wedding. They both promised to make it up to me, and while I initially said it wasn't necessary, Pam was insistent that I know how regretful they were. We ended up making plans to have dinner at a nice restaurant in the city at their expense this weekend. In retrospect, it seems that the situation wasn't really about my actions but instead about their past experiences and concerns. I still felt a bit insulted by their assumptions, but at least I'm getting a free dinner out of the deal. Many comments have surfaced suggesting that I might be naive or overly accommodating, essentially allowing my colleagues to escape accountability for labeling me as a creep. Admittedly, I find some truth in those observations. Generally, I tend to advocate for taking the high road in most situations. However, I believe this particular instance is different and might warrant a firmer stance. It's worth mentioning that I do not equate a belief in seeing the good in people with being naive. Just an hour ago, I had a conversation with my project manager where I laid out the entire situation. She recommended that I approach HR to file a complaint, as this matter could escalate into a hostile work environment. I have a meeting planned with my colleague, Bob, on Monday, but I am reluctant to pursue a formal complaint. Instead, I prefer to keep it on record, just in case any complications arise. To be honest, I don't anticipate any issues. Bob does not strike me as the type to cause trouble. Nevertheless, I have been mistaken in the past, so I appreciate the advice I've received. I have made the decision not to join Bob and Pam for dinner. Nonetheless, I will insist on a public apology from Bob that does not suggest I am a creep, as well as a request for some fresh apple cider donuts, ensuring they are not store-bought but freshly made. I genuinely appreciate the insights I have gained from the Reddit community. Although it's disappointing to turn down an opportunity for a Wagyu steak, I feel it is necessary. To provide more clarity and context before I share an update, I want to address some inquiries I received regarding my feelings about the wedding invitation. I do not believe I am entitled to an invitation. While I did want to be included, I would have been less bothered had there been honesty from the start. They were entitled to make their choices for their own wedding, but my concern lies with the way they handled the situation. I have never had conversations with Bob about women, as our relationship has not ventured into that territory. While I suspect that the women on the team discuss these matters among themselves, I am unsure. I choose to trust Pam when she speaks about her past experiences with men. She has had to tell some of her single male friends that they could not attend the event, and Bob has many male friends who were also disappointed. Pam has faced uncomfortable situations where she was approached inappropriately at clubs, and she wanted to prioritize the safety of her friends by creating a women-only environment. The unfortunate incident I referred to as the Wedding Royal Rumble occurred at the wedding of one of Pam's closest friends, which left the friend and her husband devastated as their special day was marred by chaos. Reflecting on whether I should have been invited, I would say my chances were about 70%, leaning towards me being included. The issue arose because Pam did not know me well beyond my skills in designing Super Mario Maker levels. Bob advocated strongly for my inclusion, but Pam felt uncertain. She recalled her sister, who has a reputation for being promiscuous, and believed I might attract her attention, which made Pam uncomfortable. Bob thought it would reflect poorly if I were left out, leading to the decision that Pam would take the blame for the choice. He hoped I would be understanding about the situation. Although I may seem naive, I want to emphasize that I believe Bob genuinely felt regretful about my exclusion. He appeared genuinely upset by the circumstance and acknowledged that his approach was poorly handled. According to him, it was a difficult situation to manage without awkwardness. He admitted that he panicked and didn't know how to address the matter properly. His frustration about my unwillingness to comply stemmed more from his irritation with Pam for placing him in that position rather than frustration with me. Bob promised to issue a formal apology to the team when we are all back in the office together in a few weeks. As for Pam, she expressed her remorse over the impact this situation had on me and the other men she chose to exclude. She made it clear that she would make the same choices if it meant ensuring the safety of the women around her. Pam is determined to make it up to me, emphasizing that she would like us to build a friendship going forward, and she even offered to prepare a nice home-cooked meal as part of that effort. She suggested that we become friends moving forward and extended an invitation for a nice home-cooked meal, which would be followed by some wine and a round of Mario Kart. I found myself turning that down. At that moment, she then proposed going out to an expensive restaurant instead, which I accepted. It felt like a fair compromise to me at that time. They didn't necessarily owe me an apology, yet they were offering to treat me to dinner, and I decided to go along with it. Looking back, I realized that I probably shouldn't have accepted, but I was eager to leave the current situation and head home. After reflecting on the comments from others who called me a doormat, I ultimately decided to decline their dinner offer. To communicate my change of heart, I called Bob on his work phone. He expressed disappointment but was understanding regarding my reasoning. I had organized my thoughts to present them clearly, and he assured me that it wouldn't be a big deal and that we could simply move on from the situation. I appreciated his calm response and thanked him before hanging up, thinking that would be the end of it. However, just a few minutes later, Bob called me again. I sighed and picked up the phone. To my surprise, it was Pam on the other end. She approached the conversation without hostility, but her tone conveyed frustration. She wanted to know why I had chosen not to come anymore. I explained to her what I had shared with Bob, emphasizing that while I did not want to invalidate her experiences, I didn't believe I should have to accept being labeled as a potential sexual predator. Pam responded by saying she hadn't meant it in that way. She stated that she views me as a good person but couldn't take the risk for her wedding. She practically pleaded with me to meet in person to further clarify things. Pam insisted that we could become the best of friends if I allowed her the chance to explain things more thoroughly. I declined her offer, stating that I needed to go while expressing my sympathy for what she had been through. As I ended the call, I mentioned that I didn't even receive those donuts, then hung up. Since that call, things have been quiet on their end. However, with Bob returning to the office on Monday, I worry that Pam might respond in a drastic manner. I hope this situation has come to a resolution, but I have my doubts. I will provide further updates if anything significant occurs. Now, as for the latest update regarding Bob's drunken confession, after I reached out to Bob to clarify that I wouldn't be joining him and Pam for dinner, he expressed disappointment but acknowledged my perspective. Shortly after, Pam called me back and made a strong case for keeping our plans, but I still chose to decline. I thought that would put an end to the drama, but it turns out I was wrong. I arrived at work 2 hours early on Monday, hoping to avoid an after-work chat with Bob. In a surprising turn of events, Bob also came in early, seemingly positioned to leave with me. He appeared exhausted, not just tired, but mentally drained. I had seen Bob look tired before, especially during our late-night project sessions or when he was hungover, but this was different. He looked worn out. He greeted me with a subtle nod, and I returned the gesture as we both settled into our work. During the day, I kept my scheduled meeting with HR. Our HR representative, Sally, is a wonderful woman. I shared the entire story with her, and she responded by saying that in her 15 years of HR experience, she had never encountered a more ridiculous situation. We both shared a laugh, and she assured me that it would be unofficially logged, just in case Bob or Pam took any unexpected actions. Sally mentioned that she believed Bob meant no harm, but advised me to remain vigilant throughout the day. The rest of the day passed without incident. The most notable thing that happened was seeing Bob with his head buried in his hands for a good minute or so, looking utterly defeated. With just 2 hours remaining in the workday, I went to the break room to get some water. To my surprise, Bob followed me in and approached cautiously. I gave him a look of surprise, and he raised his hands in a gesture to show he meant no harm. He acknowledged that I was likely the last person he wanted to talk to, but he needed to speak with me. I agreed, moving us closer to where the security camera was located for safety. He expressed that he would never speak to me again if that was my wish, but he wanted to buy me a drink and explain everything. Bob's tone was tinged with desperation, something I had never witnessed from him before. He urged me to allow him to buy me a drink and told me he needed to explain things that Pam hadn't shared with me during our previous meeting. It was a moment that felt heavy with emotion, and the words he finally uttered struck me like a bolt of lightning. Look man, I could really use a friend right now, and I've always considered you a friend. As much as I had wanted to stick to my original plan of not getting involved any further in this situation, I found myself softening. I have a tendency to be a bit of a softie when it comes to people in need, so I reluctantly agreed to talk with him. However, I made it crystal clear that this would be the last time we discussed this topic. Bob accepted my conditions, and we arranged to meet after work. Once the workday ended, we made our way to our usual bar, the same place where I first met both Bob and Pam. In the back of my mind, I suspected that Pam might be there, but as it turned out, she was not. Still, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of her. After we settled down at a table, Bob offered another apology. This one felt more sincere, more deeply felt than his earlier ones. I reassured him that there was no need for him to keep apologizing. I understood his regret the first time he said it. He explained that the situation surrounding their wedding was far more complicated than I initially realized. Bob revealed that he had fought tooth and nail with Pam about the exclusion of single men from their wedding, but she was steadfast in her decision. They had spent months arguing over it, and despite numerous suggestions from friends and family, Pam was unwavering. Bob had proposed a smaller wedding with only their closest family and friends, but she had always dreamed of a large celebration filled with guests. When Pam's parents suggested hiring a security guard to manage the situation, she rejected that idea too. She insisted that the possibility of single men attending their wedding should be completely eliminated. Pam believed that it was time for some single guys to experience what it was like not to be invited to a party for once in their lives. Bob countered that many of his friends were eager to attend, and their exclusion would hurt them. Pam pointed out that she too was making sacrifices, as some of her male friends wanted to come as well. Eventually, Bob gave in, stating that if the exclusion happened, he wanted it clear that he had no part in that decision. Pam agreed, willing to take the blame if things went south, but she truly believed that people wouldn't react too strongly. In a show of goodwill, Pam allowed Bob to choose their honeymoon destination, acknowledging the sacrifices he was making. They ended up traveling to the French Riviera. Bob described their wedding reception as a fantastic event filled with joy and laughter. He mentioned that many of the women attending were quite tipsy and having a great time, even though some of them grumbled about not having enough attractive men available to dance with. Bob found it amusing, noting that one woman was going around calling the wedding a lesbian wedding due to the predominantly female guest list. Interestingly, he noted that a few women were making advances toward the limited number of single men there, and Pam seemed untroubled by that. As the evening continued, Bob became slightly intoxicated and started to open up more about the fallout that followed their honeymoon. Upon returning home, they were met with what he described as a public relations nightmare. It turned out Pam had deceived some of her male friends about the real reason they were not invited, and when one of her close friends accidentally let the truth slip, it ignited a storm of anger. Many of her friends felt betrayed, believing that she was essentially labeling them as potential threats. Despite Pam's efforts to explain her perspective, her words fell on deaf ears, and she lost several friendships in the process. One of her friends confronted her, saying, "If you think I'm a rapist, then why are we even friends?" The emotional toll on Pam was significant. She had been crying for days, and her work life suffered as a result. It got so bad that she might even have to consider leaving her job. Bob, feeling the effects of the drinks he had consumed, confessed that her decision had also impacted his friendships. Many of his own friends were furious to find out they were excluded and for the reasoning behind it. On the day of the wedding, about 6 of his closest friends who hadn't been invited decided to take a fishing trip as a way to express their disapproval toward Bob and Pam. To add to the situation, they donated $500 and some items to a local women's shelter, which felt like a final jab. Bob was left devastated by it all, feeling the weight of lost friendships and the emotional fallout that stemmed from a wedding intended to celebrate love. None of those friendships would be repaired, and the damage lingered heavy in the air. Bob was in a state of emotional turmoil, feeling completely devastated by the fallout from Pam's recent decisions. His phone had become eerily silent, with messages and calls going unanswered from his close circle of friends. The situation had escalated to the point where even their families were expressing their disappointment over the way things had unfolded. Pam's parents, while putting on a brave face in public, were silently criticizing their daughter for the exclusion of certain people from the wedding festivities. Pam found herself isolated, with only her bridesmaids and a small group of 3 other friends who supported her stance on the matter. Bob recounted a moment when Pam, filled with frustration, became hysterical. She cried out, "Why can't anyone just understand my point of view?" Bob was taken aback by the intensity of her emotions, but as the conversation progressed, he realized there was much more to this complicated situation. After about an hour of drinking, Bob was feeling pleasantly tipsy, which encouraged him to share even more details. Initially, Pam had been resolute in her belief that the exclusion was justified, standing firmly by her decision. However, Bob shared that she was beginning to have doubts. She reflected that while some people understood her perspective, her approach might have come off as overly harsh and even a bit sexist. This turmoil led to numerous arguments between Bob and Pam, leaving their relationship in a fragile state. Rather than enjoying the honeymoon phase of marriage, Bob found himself grappling with a deep sense of resentment toward Pam. Feeling that her choices had cost him invaluable friendships and disrupted the lives of those around them over what he considered a trivial issue surrounding a party. Bob revealed an interesting twist in the story. Pam's parents had been supportive of her, but their public expressions of support were not echoed in private discussions. As for Pam's sister, Beth, Bob described her as being highly intelligent and successful, yet also someone with a vibrant sexual life. Beth was involved in the kink community and had even introduced both Bob and Pam to alternative lifestyles. Bob's admission that they had dabbled in these areas surprised me but didn't come with judgment. He recognized that everyone has their own interests and preferences. He elaborated that Pam had expressed fears about Beth and me potentially getting along too well due to our shared interests and compatible personalities. According to Bob, Pam had a type, and I apparently fit that mold. He remarked, somewhat jokingly, that Pam would likely have taken a strong interest in me if she had known I was single. Curiosity got the better of me, so I asked Bob if he had a picture of Pam's sister. He pulled up her Instagram, and I must admit, she was stunning, almost like Pam's twin but with a bit more curves. This revelation stirred up some frustration toward Pam again. Bob pointed out that Pam had always felt a tinge of jealousy toward Beth, despite Pam herself being a striking woman who resembled her sister quite a bit. In an effort to tease Pam, Bob playfully suggested he could give her my Instagram handle so we could connect, promising to put in a good word for me. I appreciated the gesture, finding it amusing and slightly encouraging. Bob mentioned that Pam felt a strong desire to mend fences with me because I had made a memorable impression on her during our brief encounter. It seemed like she was reaching out for new connections, feeling the weight of losing many of her friends due to her choices. Bob described Pam as being desperate to find another friend, someone to fill the void left by those she had alienated. He assured me he would rein her in, to ensure she wouldn't overwhelm me with her efforts to reconnect. However, as Bob shared more about his feelings, it became clear that his marriage was far from perfect. With the wedding process and its aftermath having turned into a chaotic nightmare, he started to question if he could endure this kind of turmoil in the long run. Bob confided that while he believed it would be shallow to end things over this incident alone, he felt as though his life had been turned upside down by Pam's decisions. He asked me to keep this information to myself, and I promised him I wouldn't reveal anything. Bob, now more than tipsy, paid for the drinks and the candid conversation, leaving me with a lot to think about regarding their complicated relationship. I promised myself that I wouldn't share any details with her. Bob, who had been with me, covered the cost of our drinks that evening. Originally, he planned to take public transport back home, but I felt that wouldn't be safe or convenient for him. I insisted that he should get an Uber instead. At first, he resisted my suggestion, arguing that he could manage, but I stood firm on my point. Eventually, he agreed to my advice, and I arranged for an Uber ride for him. Once the car arrived, I helped him get in and waved him off, feeling relieved that he would be safely on his way. About an hour later, I received a text from Pam, who was using Bob's work phone. In her message, she expressed her gratitude, saying thank you for looking after my husband and called me a good person. I chose not to reply, as I felt it was best to keep a distance from the situation. This brings us to the present moment, where I find myself hoping that this is mostly the conclusion of the drama. However, there's a nagging feeling that Pam might be feeling desperate and could act impulsively in the near future. For now, I will keep everyone updated as things progress. On a different note, I recently had a date with Beth. Nothing particularly shocking has happened since then, but there is a small update that I think is worth sharing. True to his word, Bob passed along my Instagram account to Beth. She reached out to me last week, and we began chatting. The conversation flowed so well that we decided to meet up for coffee this past weekend. I know some might expect things to have gone poorly, but I have to say, the date exceeded all of my expectations. During our time together, we talked about a variety of topics including our hobbies, personal interests, career aspirations, and even family backgrounds. It was surprising to discover just how much we had in common, even down to some of our specific food preferences. The date went so well that we ended up at a nearby bar after work for a few drinks, and yes, that went exceptionally well too. Here's the part one think will excite you: we are planning to go hiking this upcoming weekend. On our hike, we intend to stop at the winery where Bob and Pam had their wedding. I'm particularly looking forward to picking up some of those delicious apple cider donuts. If everything goes well, I'm considering asking her to be my girlfriend. There's just something about her that feels incredibly special to me. So that's my update for now, and I'll make sure to let you know how that hike date goes. Honestly, I believe the situation with Pam is mostly settled for the time being. Bob seems to be keeping his distance, having helped me out without any further involvement, and Pam hasn't reached out at all in over a week. After the hike, I plan for this to be my last update. I don't want to drag this out for unnecessary drama. Now, on to the next chapter of this saga. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has stuck with me through all of this. Your congratulations regarding my new relationship with Beth really mean a lot. As I mentioned before, Beth and I have gone on a few dates, and she continues to impress me. She's smart, funny, driven, and incredibly kind. I find myself completely smitten with her. We went on that hike this past Saturday, and it was truly an unforgettable experience. The weather was perfect, the beautiful fall foliage added to the scenery, and the view from the mountain summit was breathtaking. At the top, we enjoyed a lovely picnic. During a lull in the conversation, I mustered up my courage and asked her if she would like to be my girlfriend. I had planned to wait for a more suitable moment, but I got swept up in the beautiful surroundings. She smiled and laughed, calling me the corniest person ever for choosing such a cliché spot to ask. However, she seemed to appreciate the sentiment and said yes, which we celebrated with a kiss. On our way back, we stopped by the winery where Bob and Pam had their wedding. The scenery was just as stunning as I had heard, with panoramic views of the rolling mountains and a charming vineyard. But my main focus was on grabbing those apple cider donuts. To our amusement, we arrived a bit late and were worried we would miss out on the fresh batch of donuts. Fortunately, we managed to snag some of the last available, and they were absolutely delicious. We bought 2 dozen and even found some with apple filling. The wait was definitely worth it. After our sweet treat, we went back to her apartment where we made dinner together. I can't remember ever having such a perfect date. It felt enchanting, and I wished the night wouldn't end. When it was finally time for me to leave, I picked up my keys, expecting to head home, but she snatched them from my hand and jokingly told me that if I thought I was leaving, I must be out of my mind. Her playful tone made me smile, and I knew I wasn't going anywhere just yet. We ended up spending the rest of the weekend together, enjoying a delightful Sunday brunch followed by a relaxing walk around the city while holding hands. This past Sunday was truly special for us. We enjoyed a fantastic brunch together, the kind that just makes you feel good inside. The food was delicious, and we spent hours talking and laughing. After brunch, we decided to take a leisurely stroll around the city, hand in hand. We explored various stores, looked at all the interesting sights, and took our time enjoying each other's company. It felt perfect in every way. However, as the day came to an end, reality hit me hard. Last night, we had to part ways because we both needed to get up for work the next morning. It was difficult to say goodbye, and I was practically on the verge of tears as I walked away. The feeling reminded me of being in high school and having that first crush, a time when it seemed unbearable to be apart from someone you really liked. Now, I know this might sound overly dramatic, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of misery at work today. My mind kept drifting back to Beth, and not being with her just made everything feel a little duller. In another twist to our story, Sunday was also the day we made our relationship Instagram official. We shared our happiness, and not long after, Pam discovered it through her sister's profile. She reached out to Beth the same night. When Beth told me about their conversation, I learned that Pam asked how we got together, to which Beth replied that it was Bob who introduced us. Pam's response was simply, "I knew this would happen." That statement made us think that there might be some trouble brewing, but honestly, we were too happy to let that bother us. Pam can be upset all she wants, we're enjoying our time together. This morning, I took a moment to thank Bob for bringing us together. He shared that he and Pam had a significant argument over our relationship, but he felt it was worth all the trouble if it meant Beth and I could be together. He told me he didn't care about the fight because he believed we were meant to connect. In a light-hearted moment, I offered to buy him a drink as a form of gratitude, but he insisted that it wasn't necessary and that he was just happy to see us together. As I wrap up this update, I hold on to the hope that everything settles down. Pam seems pretty upset about our relationship, but that doesn't change how I feel about Beth. She truly is an incredible person, someone you might only meet once in a lifetime. I'll make sure to keep you posted if anything else happens. Sending peace and love your way.